let's talk about the crackdown on anti-CAA protesters. We're all dealing with the fallout of the lockdown in different ways, the financial, the emotional, the psychological aspects. Doctors are on the front line, sometimes losing their lives in a bid to save people. In the middle of all this, the police, especially in Delhi and UP, seem to have time for something else. Yes, they're out to get the anti-CAA protesters. The protests that began in December were known for their largely peaceful nature and their constant call to use constitutional means. Yet, according to those in power, they're responsible for the violence. We'll talk about this, but first, here are some facts. We start with the COVID-19 update. As of today morning, there are 17,265 confirmed cases, of which 14,175 are active. 543 people have died, and almost 3,84,000 people have been tested so far. Amid all this in recent times, the special cell of the Delhi police has charged 50 members of the Jamia Coordination Committee with instigating protests against the CAA and the NRC. They have sought to draw a connection between the protests and the riots in Delhi in February this year. The police have also charged several student protesters with making speeches that led to the violence. It has not followed up on cases, however, of BJP leaders making speeches that actually resulted in violence. The arrest of Zarufa Sargar and Miran Haider, both Jamia Millia Islamia students, has caused particular outrage, as has the charging of Sharjeel Imam and Dr. Kafil Khan. Concerned citizens have been raising the question as to why these arrests, if necessary at all, could not have waited until after the lockdown was lifted. At this moment, the Delhi police is also pursuing, detaining and arresting people from Northeast Delhi, where the riots took place, on the grounds that are being described by legal experts as vague. By February, 124 FIRs had been filed and 623 arrests had been made in the riots. At that time, there had been the allegation that the police was not even-handed in dealing with the riots and was slow in bringing the situation back to normalcy. The arrests over the past few days call into question the role of the police again. We spoke to Manisha Sethi of NALSAR University on these issues. Here's what she had to say.
Welcome, Manisha. Yeah, Manisha, one of the things, a lot of people seem very concerned about the Delhi police being very busy making a link, it seems, between the events of last December, the CAA NRC protests, which took place against these two proposals of the government and the law, and then the Northeast Delhi riots which took place. So, is there really a connection to be drawn over here? Why is the police linking these two events which are separated by a long period of time?
No, it's obviously a political narrative that the Delhi police is trying to build. Making a connection, as you said, between the anti-CAA protests, the protests that we saw in Shaheen Bagh, in various places, and then which spiraled into a series of protests, very, very courageous and exemplary struggles across the country. So the attempt here is first to criminalize that protest, to make links between that and violence which broke out in Northeast Delhi. Secondly, it is to protect and to kind of whitewash the very, very inflammatory speeches that were given by the leaders of the ruling party, by aspiring leaders and established leaders of the ruling party, by members of parliament no less, by state ministers no less, which really called for violence against those who were protesting. There that link can be made, where the call was given for violence. And what the police is doing now is really to kind of erase that, that those inflammatory, insightful speeches that those leaders gave, and which actually then resulted in, young men firing in crowds, and we tend to have a short memory. But let's remember that the very next day, after a member of parliament gave a call for Goli Maru and so on, there were these young men, out on the streets of Delhi, waving pistols and so on. So where that link has to be made and is obvious and apparent, those links are being erased and effaced. And where there are no links between violence, in fact, even in Northeast Delhi, if you see, it was Kapil Mishra's very blatant sort of call to arms, saying that Trump is here, and after that we'll see. And with the senior officers of the police standing next to him, giving these warnings and threats, openly issuing threats, and thereafter the the eruption of the violence there. So those links are being effaced, from public memory, from the public narrative, and instead a very false and spurious narrative of the linkages between protests which were entirely peaceful, entirely democratic, and were speaking and articulating a language of constitutionalism. They are being stigmatized and criminalized through these, various arrests. And in fact, if you look at, we've been saying this, that on the one hand, you have, FIRs which relate to violence in Northeast Delhi, which are being investigated by the local police there, by the crime branch. And on the other hand, you have this really omnibus, very vaguely worded FIR, which is being prosecuted, which is being investigated by the special cell. And that is a conspiracy FIR. And so it is through this, it doesn't even name any of these people who are now being arrested or detained, whether it's Sarpura or whether it's Miran or others, and these 50 people who've been, students. So there is a very clear attempt to stigmatize, and FIRs are supposed to be, the first information. It's called the first information report for a specific reason. That it has to have some information about, some cognizable crime has been committed and so on, right? But if you read this FIR, which is 59/2020, it is so vaguely worded. It has conspiracy theories about how Muslims did not send their kids to school, and these people were conspiring. So people from different organizations. So basically, what it's trying to say is that people from all organizations, barring the BJP and its frontal organizations, were conspiring together to unleash this mad fury which visited Northeast Delhi. So it's a political narrative, and this the Delhi police and the special cell is investigating it in the service of this political narrative. That is what is absolutely clear.
So
And if you
these young people who have been charged, and the people in the Northeast Delhi, they are, there are also accusations that it is mostly the Muslims who are, many of them were also victims of the riots, who are being harassed. Now, the police has picked up some relatives of the people whom they were looking for. So if they went to a home and they found that the person they want to arrest or question is not there, they pick up an uncle or another relative and take him away. These are also classic tactics, actually, which are employed by the police when they want to, not just in Delhi. This has happened in other parts. But what is the aim? What does this serve? Because people are battling a pandemic, a food shortage, and the police is supposed to be handling that as well. So why then be so gung ho on these arrests? Why is it suddenly so important now during this pandemic?
No, the aim is quite clear. It's to terrorize a section of the population. It is to say that you cannot protest, that you have to live with the law like CAA, which is clearly discriminatory on religious grounds. It is to give a message to all those who were part of that struggle, who were and other democratic voices as well. So the aim is quite clear, that what it intends to do. But as I said, it is to stigmatize protesters, but also to whitewash the police's own role. I mean, apart from the fact that what the likes of Mishra and others said and did, it is let's not forget from just yesterday, a couple of days ago, there is this story that Sharjeel Imam has been now charged with sedition for instigating violence on 15th December near Jamia, and that Dr. Kafil Khan has been now arrested under NSA, National
Yes.
Security Act, which allows him to be detained for a year without any charges being brought against him. So, and again, Dr. Kafil Khan has been charged with instigating and inspiring students. I mean, just look at the language of the grounds on which he has been detained under NSA. It says that he inspired students to hold a protest on the gates of Aligarh Muslim University against the Home Minister Amit Shah. Is that a crime now? This is really very clearly a direct assault on our democratic rights as citizens of this country, and they are trying to make a link, as I said. So let's go back and remember what happened on 15th December, both in Aligarh and in Jamia, and that is amply documented, especially in Jamia.
Yes.
It's amply documented that it was the police which brutally and wantonly assaulted students in the premises of the university. And in order to cover up their own violence and brutality, they actually wrecked CCTV cameras and so on. But it was still recorded on many students' phones and so on. So, and because the case is also before the NHRC and the Allahabad High Court and in Delhi as well. And again, in Delhi, for example, the Delhi police said in the action taken report that, oh, we went in to protect innocent trapped students in the university. I mean, this
Right, but
must
there were
be
those videos from the library which showed that there was no protection being offered. It was the opposite.
absolutely, absolutely. So it is also trying to whitewash its own role by saying that violence was instigated by Sharjeel Imam or by Dr. Kafil Khan. What it's trying to do is to make us forget, the very brutality with which it dealt with students, both in Jamia and in
So there
just
is
the
also this
full-scale war.
concern that even once the lockdown is lifted, the country might not return overnight to normalcy, whatever the situation was before this, and that once you give a certain amount of power to whoever is in authority, they will tend to want to keep that with them for as long as they can. Is that one of the risks we also face now? Which is why I was asking about the
Yes,
pandemic.
absolutely, absolutely. I don't think we'll emerge at the other end of the pandemic the same we were. Not that we were in a very great position prior to that in terms of civil liberties and so on, but I think it's going to get worse. We already have seen, a series of ordinances issued against, say, curbing the rights of labor, for example. All the labor laws which had been hard won over decades are being, just perverted through these ordinances, through these decrees, and that's just one aspect of it. The invocation of NSA, for example, against the field. I think all of this will kind of expand, and be used more frequently, uh, and also the sense that uh, the government has now of riding roughshod over our civil liberties, that becomes normalized, over extended period of lockdown. It'll be very difficult to go back, you know, to earlier times when you could. I mean, already we are seeing that there's this through these arrests and detentions and so on. They're trying to stigmatize all protests, all democratic protests. So, that's one way of
And a
doing that.
constant vilification of Muslims who are being held responsible for everything that happens, which is not good.
I mean, if you can communalize such a thing as a pandemic, as a corona, I mean, then what else are we capable of?
Right.
So, I mean, even in situations where you thought that, people would sort of kind of suspend their hate politics, at least for a while, you in fact see an intensification of that. And, the whole pathologization, this in fact has allowed for the further reinforcing of the pathologization of the Muslim community, corona jihad and so on. So, yeah.
In our next story, we look at the number of asymptomatic COVID 19 cases in India. NDTV quoted an ICMR scientist as saying that up to 80% of COVID 19 cases in India could be asymptomatic. This means that those infected do not show any symptoms and hence go about their daily lives because they do not know that they are unwell. We spoke to Newsclick's Prabir Purkayastha on this issue. Here is what he had to say. Thank you, Prabir, for joining us. So yesterday, the Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal announced that all the 186 cases that had been identified in Delhi were asymptomatic cases. And today morning, we have media reports of ICMR officials saying that nearly 80% of cases in India could be asymptomatic too. So was this expected or is this a worrying new development, so to speak?
Newsclick has been talking about this for quite some time. That we have a lot of asymptomatic cases. Wuhan itself, 1 month back, said 60% of the cases were not detected. There are papers which have been coming which shows that there are a number of asymptomatic cases. What the proportion is, we'll come to that in a minute. And more importantly, asymptomatic cases are the major contributors of infections. In fact, Wuhan study said that 44% of the infections, they ran a controlled study, 44% of the cases were infected. Those who were infected were found to have been infected in the asymptomatic stage. So asymptomatic infections have been a major source of what we see later as the infections. And because you don't see them, and because they're spreading in the community, we don't see the extent of the spread. Now, what is the extent of the spread is the second question. So there's no question that asymptomatic cases were known for more than 1 month to be there in large numbers, and they were also infecting others. It's not that they were not infecting, they're infecting others. In fact, I have a report now which says in January that the Chinese had actually informed WHO as well as the United States that asymptomatic cases are infectious. So human-to-human transmission takes place even in the asymptomatic stage. We just have much better numbers at the moment. The second question is how much of asymptomatic cases are there? And there you can only find out, again, which Newsclick has been saying, we had a discussion with Professor Rath only a few days back, and saying that antibody tests, or what are called serological tests, which do not identify essentially infectious or not infectious, you have it COVID-19 or not, but show antibodies, which means that you might have been infected in the past, that this is going to tell us what extent of people are there who are infected but not symptomatic. And there the Santa Clara results are now out. There's a Stanford study done in California in Santa Clara County, which shows that the number of asymptomatic cases could be 50 or 80 times. That's, of course, in one county in United States, California state. But 50 to 80%, 50 to 80 times the people could be there who are asymptomatic and who have not been identified as COVID-19 patients. Now, of course, US is a very specific case also, that the number of people identified are much smaller than what the extent of even symptomatic cases are, because as you know, their testing has been still relatively weak compared to the population who's probably infected. And that's mainly because if you see the test results that are coming, that out of 5 people tested, 1 person seems to be infected. Now that would show that the community transmission is much bigger, even with symptomatic cases, than what they are testing. In India, for instance, at the moment, only about 4% of the people tested are turning out positive. Right. So that would seem to indicate the community transmission is there, but not of the same order. So this would show that the number of asymptomatic cases is much larger. May not be 50 to 80 times, but certainly 4 to 5 times of the people who have symptoms. And even today, ICMR's base recommendation is don't test people unless they have symptoms. They should have contacts, plus they should have symptoms. They have now started doing random testing for those who don't have symptoms. But I think this is the first time that they have also started looking at testing people who have been in contact and who are in what are called the hotspots. Right. So the hotspot policy seems to have changed, and that's the one which immediately brought out that there are a huge number of cases who are asymptomatic but are testing now positive. This is PCRA tests. These are not tests which are just antibody tests, which can give you false positives or false negatives. These are really relatively more rigorous testing. And if that is happening, then I think we would see a spurt of cases which would be there in terms of the statistics. But let's not think that therefore suddenly there is a huge takeoff of transmissions. What we are finding is past transmissions which were there, which we did not identify. We have it undetected, and now we are detecting them because we have widened our testing criteria, right, and we have not restricted it. We probably restricted it because we just didn't have the test kits. So the ICMR was trying to make it out it was a medical issue, but as you know, ICMR has been criticized for being highly opaque on these issues. It transpires that now we have the kits, we have widened the criteria, and the not widening the criteria was basically because of a lack of kits.
Right. So with respect to, say, the issue of the lockdown, or with respect to the issue of public health and policy over the next couple of months, what does this imply? Because when we have a huge number of cases which are asymptomatic, there's no real idea of what could be a place where there's a lot of people infected. So what exactly are we looking at in terms of these issues?
Well, there are 3 sets of issues here. One is purely the testing, what should be the testing strategy. Mm-hmm. There, hotspots, extensive testing everybody, that there is no getting around it. Right. In other areas which have not shown up as yet as hotspots, do contact tracing plus do random testing. This is the other area to do. For random testing, you can do serological testing, or what ICMR is doing, pooled swabs. That means you take 50 people, take swabs from them, pull it together and run one test. That means you conserve your test kits. But if any one of the 50 has a COVID-19 infection, it will show up. Then you individually test all 50 of them. So those which are not hotspots, you can do both serological testing and also pooled swab testing to find out what are the possibilities. And then you can find new hotspots and then do contact tracing again. But India does not have the luxury of doing extensive testing as yet. So we will have to do really extensive contact tracing. We have the ability to do it because that's what the TB program was. And we had the whole paraphernalia of the public health system once upon a time, in which we have from ASHA workers to the TB unit, TB following up people. The TB program was also what was a base on which we patterned our influenza program, when we said we need to follow up unusual respiratory infections program. We have the polio program. So India has a lot of public health initiative, which is basically following up people and going to the community. So those programs have to be utilized now for contact tracing with the district administration. As we have said again, this is not a policing issue. That thinking that just police will solve the problems and just lockdown is the answer is not the answer. You have to face the epidemic as a public health issue, and all these things have to be done. The third is protect your hospital staff. That we see hospital staff are on the front line of infections. They are falling ill. Hospitals are being shut down. If that happens, and this also extends to private hospitals, not just public health hospitals. Public hospitals, you can also at least quickly retool to face the infections. The private hospitals have no public health responsibilities, have worked as just simple profit centers for the hospital. Private practitioners who built the so-called clinics into hospitals and so on. But you need to bring them in because the scale of infections today, to regard them as outside your public health infrastructure won't work. So we need to bring them into the infrastructure of public health. How to do it? What way can they partner? Because they are also facing a problem. They get either infected or they have to shut down, or they're not getting their money, which is basically fleecing a certain set of rich people who come for various ailments. So those things are not going to work. How you do bring them in is your essential new task that you have. So these are the three things that you have to do in order to get away from the problem. I'm not looking at the problem of food, migrant labor, the poorer sections, what all other measures have to be done. I'm restricting myself only to the health and the epidemic aspect of the issue. But obviously those other issues are equally, if not even more important, because people otherwise will die and you will have a total breakdown of the social order itself. And then, of course, none of this will work.
Right. Thank you so much, Prabir, for talking to us. That's all we have in this episode of Let's Talk. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest developments of the day. Until then, keep watching Newsclick.